resolution was adopted in 2019 during the fourth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. Thank you very much for having made the time to join this consultation today. On behalf of all colleagues, I would like to extend our warm welcome to all of you. I'm Rie Tsutsumi. I'm the Regional Coordinator for the Agenda of Resource Efficiency at the United Nations Environment Programme, also called UNEP, based in Geneva. I am also the regional focal point for this resolution, and I will be facilitating this consultation today. UNEP has convened a series of virtual consultations at the sub-regional and regional levels in all UNEP regions from July to September of this year. Today, we are hosting the Penrimate Global Consultation, which is bringing all the regions together to further advance in the discussions and to be updated on the next steps as we prepare for the fifth session of the Environment Assembly, which will be held in February 2021. This consultation has been organized jointly by the United Nations Environment Programme and the University of Queensland Sustainable Minerals Institute. We are also grateful for the generous support of the Government of Switzerland's Federal Office of the Environment to implement this resolution, and the Government of Mexico, who sponsored this resolution during UNEA 4. Distinguished representatives, before I give the floor to our first speaker, allow me to provide you with an overview of this consultation. First, we will hear a few opening words from Angela Kaluiki, Legal Officer in UNEP's Law Division, as well as the government proponents of this resolution adopted at the fourth session of the Environment Assembly. We will then hear from Professor Daniel Franks, who will share with us an overview of the process so far, the events held, submissions received, and a description of the next steps in this UNEA process. Next, all of the UNEP regional focal points for this resolution will present summaries of the regional consultation. Finally, the floor will be opened for reflections from governments and all stakeholders on the regional summaries and future actions for UNEA 5. So with this introduction, I would like to invite Ms. Angela Kariuki to share a few words of welcome. Angela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rie. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this global consultation on the implementation of the United Nations Environment Assembly Resolution 4/19 on mineral resource governance. The resolution recognizes the important contribution of mining towards the achievement of the SDGs and the dependence of low-carbon clean technologies on metals and minerals. The resolution requests UNEP to collect certain information on mineral resource governance and to report this information back to the fifth session of the UN Environment Assembly to be held in February 2021. Following the outbreak of COVID-19, we shifted the entire process of consultations with governments and other stakeholders to virtual engagement techniques. We therefore used the constraints imposed by COVID-19 to implement an online and virtual consultation process with wide reach and significant participation. This also enabled us to engage a larger number of diverse people through virtual forms than was originally planned through in-person events. Our technical partner, Professor Daniel Franks from the University of Queensland, will give you a few more details on the consultation process shortly, including the number of stakeholders involved. But just to emphasize that it's been a very inclusive process that has been extremely rewarding in terms of the inputs received from all the participants. This global consultation today also gives us the opportunity to report back to you on the outcomes of the sub-regional and regional consultations that were held over the last 2 months. You will hear during today's session what each region has identified as the most pressing governance challenges, good practices, and future actions required to raise the bar on the governance of mineral resources. After that, we look forward to deepening our discussion on future actions to be promoted in the area of governance, particularly those actions which are necessary to shift the needle on mineral resource governance through global efforts. Together with what we've heard in the earlier consultations, today's discussion will be reflected in the report of the UNEP Executive Director on the implementation of the resolution to UNEA 5. Allow me to reinforce in my intervention a few elements which I hope will help structure our discussion today. Firstly, we should jointly reflect on how we can better align mining with the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as reflect on how mining can help us advance towards the SDGs at a faster pace. COVID-19 has also affected commodity markets in various ways and has significantly changed our conversation around the mining sector. It's impacted infrastructure planning and has called for further strengthening of the governance of the mining sector. This has necessarily shifted some attention to responsible sourcing and reinvigorated discussions on how to promote responsibility across supply chains, while at the same time increasing the resilience of mining operations and the protection and empowerment of the communities in which they operate. We should also jointly reflect on how to address critical issues where governance should be revisited, including sand extraction, mine tailings, artisanal and small-scale mining, development minerals, and the power imbalances around the elements of good governance. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, your participation in this consultation is extremely important to further obtain feedback on the governance of the extractive sector and to contribute to defining the way forward on this agenda during UNEA 5. I therefore very much look forward to today's discussion. Thanks very much for your attention, and back over to you, Rie.
Thank you very much, Angela. I'm now pleased to give the floor to Ms. Mariana Zuniga of the Government of Mexico's Secretariat of Environment and Natural Resources for reflections on the implementation of this resolution. Floor is yours.
Hola, buenos días. Agradecemos su participación a esta sesión para la consulta global sobre la resolución de la gobernanza de los recursos minerales. Sean todos ustedes.
The resolution on the governance of mineral resources. Welcome to all. We have launched this process in July. UNEP launched a number of consultations at regional and sub-regional levels to compile information on sustainable practices and information on the implementation of strategies in terms of governance of mineral resources. During these consultations, we have noted with a great deal of interest that a great many countries had adopted a great many measures in terms of the governance of mineral resources. It was very interesting to hear all of the points of view here, those of researchers, academics, members of the private sector, and of course, players in the public sectors. We have looked at the SMA sector, and we tried to figure out what was going on in ASM rather, and we tried to see what was going on in terms of value chains and what role the extractive sector played at the level of the economies of countries and what could be done in terms of governance of mineral resources. We have also looked at the phenomenon of urban growth. We noted that there was a growing need for mineral resources, and this was a trend that was most likely to continue. Countries must react. They must meet these challenges by adopting measures for a more equitable sharing of the benefits of these systems. We need to preserve ecosystems. Mining activities in the extractive sector should not damage the environment. We therefore require rules and regulatory frameworks which are abided by. We require fiscal policies. We need to strengthen those bodies which are responsible for monitoring all of this. It is also fundamental that governments and countries should exchange information, should exchange their experiences for better governance of mineral resources, to ensure that there is greater social fairness and that there is respect for the environment. We will, in the near future, be able to look at all of the results which we will have collected during these consultations, and a report will be presented during the 5th session of UNEA next February. I thank you in advance for your comments and your contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Now I would like to invite Ms. Laura Prashkov, Federal Office of the Environment of the Government of Switzerland. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Rie, for giving me the floor for short welcome remarks on behalf of Switzerland. So the resolution adopted at UNEA 4 really put the topic of mineral resource governance at the top of the global environmental agenda, and has never been timelier because addressing environmental challenges associated with minerals lies at the heart of crucial current developments. First, because the sustainable management of minerals is crucial for the achievement of the SDG, with only 10 years left for Agenda 2030, and also for the objective of the Paris Agreement. Second, in the COVID context, the mining sector can support economic recovery, which can put pressure on environmental standards. The mining sector is also a supplier of materials such as sand and gravels for the infrastructure sector, which is often at the center of economic recovery packages. Those are some of the challenges faced by all countries, whether they extract resources or not. We are all dependent on mineral resources and interdependent on their sustainable management. So we would like to congratulate UNEP for facilitating such a rich and inclusive consultation process. This process really gave and still gives the opportunity for all member states and stakeholders to provide valuable inputs, to raise challenges, share success stories, and reflect on possible follow-up action that will feed in the report to UNEA 5. Then member states will have the opportunity to decide on what are the next steps that we could take to support a stronger governance of mineral resources. So we look forward to the continuation of this important work. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Laura. Distinguished representatives, allow me to invite Professor Daniel Franks, our technical partner from the University of Queensland, to provide an overview of the implementation of the resolution, including a few quick words on the next steps. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. As Rie has just mentioned, my name is Daniel Franks, and I'm a professor at the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland in Australia. I've been working with my colleague Julia Keenan to support the United Nations Environment Programme on the implementation of UNEA 4. And today I will share a brief overview of the implementation of the Resolution on Mineral Resource Governance to date. As both Laura, Mariana and Angela have already emphasised, the importance of mineral resource governance cannot be understated. Every year, the world consumes more than 60 billion tonne of minerals, producing more than 4.4 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of waste. And minerals matter in our efforts to achieve the ambitious Sustainable Development Goals because they're literally the matter that underpins much of global development, whether it be the copper that wires communication, the clay bricks that provide shelter, the mineral fertilizers fundamental for agriculture, the lithium and cobalt fueling the global transition to renewable energy, and the gravel and stone that builds bridges and paves roads. And while our global community is in the midst of a pandemic and our thoughts are rightly focused on the immediate health of citizens, we must, as Secretary General Guterres has argued, also look toward how we build back better. And many member states have signalled an intention for infrastructure and mining-led recoveries. And both of these paths would require of us greater attention to how mineral resources are governed and on the environmental, social and economic dimensions of their extraction, their processing, recycling and reuse. The UNEA resolution on mineral resource governance requests UNEP to collect information on sustainable practices, identify knowledge gaps and options for implementation strategies, and undertake an overview of existing assessments of different governance initiatives and approaches on sustainable management of metal and mineral resources. And UNEP is requested to report back to the 5th session of UNEA to be held in Nairobi in February of 2021. The resolution builds on a number of foundational studies undertaken by UNEP Grid Geneva on sand, UNEP Grid Arundel on tailings, and the International Resources Panel on the broader topic of mineral resource governance. Momentum has also been building with international cooperation efforts on artisanal and small-scale mining, including the Minamata Convention on Mercury adopted in Japan in 2013, and the Mosi-oa-Tunya Declaration on artisanal and small-scale mining, quarrying and development adopted in Zambia in 2018. Under the mandate of the UNEA resolution, UNEP has held consultations to obtain feedback on the governance of extractive industries, understand the political landscape as well as regional needs, and more specifically, consultations have identified best practices and knowledge gaps, assess governance options, and consider common elements of interest for next steps. As Angela has already mentioned, our original plan was to hold in-person multi-stakeholder consultations across Latin America and the Caribbean, Asia and the Pacific, Africa, Europe and Central Asia, North America and West Asia. The consultation plan was substantially revised following the outbreak of COVID-19, with a stronger emphasis placed on virtual engagement, and our goal was to maximize the reach of the virtual format with a potential for much larger number of people engaged, but also ensure the depth of the discussions due to the shorter amount of time available during our meetings. More than 1,685 people from 123 countries joined one of our 20 virtual consultative meetings held between July and September in partnership with UNEP's regional offices. The meetings were held across 4 formats. First, briefings to member state governments. Second, sub-regional consultations, which included a statement from the proposing nations, presentations on the foundational studies, and open discussion on the core consultation questions. 3, regional consultations, where the outcomes of the sub-regional consultations were presented and further refined. And 4, global consultations, where today you'll hear summaries from each of the regional events. Interpretation was available in the UN languages. The meetings were accompanied by a range of supporting material. We prepared a discussion paper that outlined the context of the UNEA 4 resolution, summarized global trends, presented key findings from the foundational studies, and developed questions for consultation. The paper was peer-reviewed and made available in all UN languages. The paper was downloaded more than 6,000 times. We also produced 2 podcasts. The first was on the role of UNEA and the Mineral Resource Governance Resolution. The second was on the issue of tailings and the new global industry standard on tailings management. And the podcasts have been streamed nearly 900 times. We've invited written submissions, both in the form of a survey and written responses to the discussion questions. A 6-week submission period was available. A total of 107 written submissions were received from stakeholders from 61 countries. The next step in the process, that the global forum will be followed next week by a meeting of representatives on mineral resource governance initiatives to discuss the potential for greater harmonisation. In November, a Nexus dialogue will be held, bringing together members of the UN Environment Management Group to encourage coordination on the topic across the UN system. An official report on the implementation of the resolution will be prepared in October and will be followed by a more substantive report in December that will be available to the public on the findings of the consultation. I'd like to thank everyone who's participated and contributed as part of this process to date. Your contributions have been very rich and of great value to the process. I'd like to encourage us today to start to make the shift from a discussion about challenges and gaps towards one about solutions, and especially solutions that can be advanced through international cooperation and the UNEA process. With that, I'd like to hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our opening speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the next portion of our program. During each of the sub-regional and regional consultations held over the last 2 months, we asked participants to consider 3 key questions to enable us to respond to the operative paragraphs of the UNEA resolution. Each of the regional focal points will present a summary of the feedback now. We will first hear from Robert Wabnoha from the Africa Regional Office, then Georgina Lloyd from the Asia Pacific Regional Office will present. Next, our technical partner, Julia Keenan, will share the European summary. Following that, we will hear from our colleague, Francesco Gaetani, on the Latin America and Caribbean experience. And finally, Tarek Al-Kauri will share with us perspective from the West Asia discussion. Let me give the floor to Robert.
My name is Robert Wabnoha. I work as the Regional Coordinator on Environmental Governance in Africa. The Africa region held sub-regional consultations that took place on 20th and 23rd of July in both English and French languages. The regional consultations were held on 6th of August, again in English and French. Collectively, around 250 participants representing both governments and other stakeholders were connected to the discussions. We asked participants about the most pressing mineral resource governance challenges in their countries or region. The region put forward a number of pressing challenges as follows. One is that mineral resources must be integrated in and drive the development agenda of countries and the Africa region. 2, continuing issues with implementation of mineral resource governance initiatives. 3, strengthening and harmonizing mineral laws and deepening local content of policies. The 4th pressing issue was improving operations of ASM sector. 5, carrying out baseline research on various forms of resource, mineral resources and other natural capital. 6, strengthening public participation in decision-making and exploiting economic opportunities. The issue of recovery from COVID also featured very prominently. Transparency in the supply chain. The 9th one was improving legislation on water, tailings, and closure of mines. The last one was regulation of development minerals, such as sand, construction materials, and aggregate. We then discussed good good practices from the region. Participants made several points that are summarized into the following. ASM formalization processes in many countries, including Ethiopia, Botswana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and others. The African mining vision of the African Union provides the necessary tenets to enable countries to make the most of its resources, including ASM. The Mosi Tonya Declaration on ASM and Development of 2018, where many ASM miners and governments were involved in shaping the declaration. On remote sensing, the African Minerals Geosciences Center works with many governments in Africa to provide support on the task. The Minamata Convention on Mercury and Associated Capacity Building. For example, in the Gambia, for the petroleum sector, there's a project for removing legislative gaps and aligning them with other legislation. Ethiopia Gold Purchasing Initiative. For purposes of these, there are various extractive data platforms that can be used, and the information will be provided to you. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, mining companies, following the revised mining code, now pay 15% royalties directly to mining communities. And I think this is a good practice. Other countries in Africa, such as Tanzania, are also paying a percentage of royalties to miners. The Gambian Mining Code has set up a foundation which can be used for the communities and others. And that is also one of the practices which we picked from the consultations. On future action, the following 7 key suggestions emanating from the regional consultations were picked out. 1, capacity building and training at all levels on a range of issues related to mineral resource governance. Despite the development of many multi-stakeholder initiatives, performance standards, improvements in legislation, many problems still remain. The key one being implementation of these initiatives lack consistency, enforcement, and compliance. Community and governments lack awareness, resources, and capacity to respond to these initiatives. The second point for future action is ASM performance. The 2018 Mosi-Tonya Declaration on Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining, Quarrying and Development, actualizing these aspirations in legal frameworks. The legal frameworks must bring those aspirations of Mosi-Tonya Declaration into reality. Implementing and localizing the declaration across Africa will provide practical assistance to miners, plus help overcome the lack of understanding of the sector and its potential to be a tool for social and economic transformation, both at local and national levels. The third key future action to take is to continue with the legal and policy reforms, including ASM, development minerals, and other gaps and misalignments. Although significant work has been done in many countries to strengthen mineral laws, there are still areas of improvement. Sector transformation can be supported by laws and policies on public participation and cooperation, transparency, and bringing in the African Free Trade Area Agreement, value chain development, value addition, foreign direct investment, private sector controls, anti-corruption, long-term and long-term environmental liability. Legal frameworks should cover development minerals as well as the export minerals. The fourth future action is on developing public participation processes, including for planning, conflict resolution, and redress. It is important to ensure that all stakeholders have voice or influence in the operation of the sector. Lack of capacities of communities to participate in existing processes and also to deal with the issues of conflict minerals is one of the many issues that should be addressed. In particular, participants advocated further supporting women's participation in key decision-making processes. The fifth future area of action was improving data availability on a range of relevant issues, such as resources and reserves, natural capital, available natural capital, social conditions, governance and institutional capacities, value chain, and value addition. We need to know the resource we have is a statement that was made during the consultations by many participants. We need better accounting of various forms of resources. These, such as mineral resources, other forms of natural capital, so that we can plan how best to integrate mineral resource extraction into economic development planning for each country or the Africa region. That is also another statement which was very strong during the consultations. Having a strong knowledge base will also help to improve project assessment and approvals. The sixth area of future action was improving coordination of ASM and the rapid economic development, including environmental and social impact monitoring. COVID-19 and other emergencies in recent years and disasters have identified a gap in the mobilization of the sector in a responsible manner. Coordinating mineral governance with disaster preparedness planning should be a priority, as should be developing guidelines and standards for sustainable sourcing of sand and aggregate for infrastructure and reduction of environmental impacts of ASM. 7, which is also aggregated as the last future action, is the responsible sourcing of development minerals and development of alternatives. Construction standards, barriers and opportunities for using alternative construction materials, including reuse of tailings and recycled aggregates, should be analyzed. Further investigation of the potential to develop an observatory to collect data and expand monitoring of sand and aggregates was suggested. Sustainable management of sand mining was emphasized. That is what came from the summary of the regional consultations from Africa. Thank you for listening to me, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that summary, Robert. Georgie, may I give you a floor?
Half of the Asia-Pacific region, the first general briefing for member states to introduce the implementation of the resolution was first held on the 8th of July 2020. This was followed by 3 sub-regional consultations, which were held on the 29th, 30th, and 31st of July. The regional consultation followed in English and Chinese on the 19th of August. Collectively, approximately 118 participants were connected to the discussions in the Asia-Pacific region. We summarized during these consultations the most pressing challenges to mineral resource governance that were raised during the consultations, and we summarized these into 9 points. The first being regulatory capture and corruption. Second, lack of transparency, accountability, and remedy. Third, threats to environmental defenders and communities. Fourth, changing expectations relating to technological development and social tolerance for harm. Fifth, lack of holistic evaluation of mining as part of development, including issues of intergenerational equity. Sixth, ineffective local economic development strategies. 7, deep sea mining policy and guidance. 8, improving practice in informal mining, ASM, and development minerals. And finally, 9, tailings and environmental legacies. Also, during these consultations, a large number of good practices were identified and examples were provided to us. A few of these examples of good practices include, at first, in Telangana, India, which has developed an auction system for river sand, improving traceability and formalization. Also in India, the Goenchi Manti movement, which is a reconceptualization of mineral ownership for development. Third, we heard of the creation of multi-partite monitoring teams that involve CSOs and subnational governments in monitoring compliance. We also heard of the creation of mandatory social development and environmental protection and enhancement funds. We also heard of examples of the implementation of final mine decommissioning on rehabilitation funds, which require miners to fully fund a rehabilitation plan 5 years before the depletion or closure of the mine. We heard from the Thai government that they have revised their mining law to center sustainable development goals. We also heard from the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, or SPRAP, which had carried out EIA training specifically focusing on the mining industry and using this training for the mining sector and environment sector to share their approval processes and demonstrating how these are linked. The training also identified gaps in policies and laws and how these can be harmonized. Furthermore, SPREP is also working with some countries to plan out the preparation of mining guidelines to support countries in governing approval processes and operations of mining activities. Also within the Pacific, we heard about the Waigani Convention, which controls the transport of hazardous and potentially hazardous materials through the Pacific. And we also heard from the Global Aggregates Information Network, or GAIN. The purpose of GAIN is to openly share experiences and industry best practices in the interest of promoting greater sustainability and performance of the aggregates industry globally. In terms of future action, we asked participants to share their ideas, and a great range of ideas were presented. These were centered around 5 main themes. The first of those themes was concern for the future, improving the long-term focus of regulators, miners, and other stakeholders to ensure that existing social, environmental, cultural, and economic capitals are considered when designating and approving mining areas. Also, importantly, intergenerational equity should be considered. Following the events of this year in particular, we heard of unprecedented floods, fires, and COVID-19, that the mining industry needs to understand and take responsibility for its contributions to climate change, land use change, and biodiversity impacts. Second, we also heard about minimum standards. We were asked that UNEA should consider actively recommending minimum standards in the spirit of the ILO labor standards and the IFC standards. These should take a holistic and human rights approach and involve a dialogue between stakeholders about effective transparency and accountability. Participants also suggested that minimum standards should include options for legal remedy, perhaps at an international level, and minimum standards for community benefit sharing. Third, we heard about recycling and reuse. Suggestions that further research into recycling and reuse of tailings and other minerals waste and other mine waste. Examples of areas for investigation included remining wastes, including by ASM, reuse of demolition waste for aggregates, incorporating waste reuse options into mine planning and closure planning. Fourth, we heard about the harmonization of mining laws, policies, and governance initiatives. It was suggested that harmonization of initiatives provides an opportunity for closing gaps and loopholes, as well as reducing confusions about which standards should apply. Finally, for next steps and future actions, we heard of technical assistance and capacity building. There are many opportunities for technical assistance and capacity building that were nominated by participants, particularly in relation to compliance and enforcement of new and existing regulation. Promoting coordination and connection between different parts of governments was also seen as an opportunity in the Asia-Pacific region. So with that, I conclude the summary of the Asia-Pacific regional consultations.
Thanks very much for the feedback from Asia Pacific, Georgie. I am now pleased to call our technical partner from the University of Queensland, Julia Keenan, to present the summary of Europe. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The summary for the Europe and the Caucasus region, the consultation process for the Europe region kicked off with a general briefing on the 23rd of July 2020. This was followed by 2 sub-regional consultations held on the 25th and 27th of August. And then the regional was held on the 10th of September. In total, almost 100 participants were connected to these discussions. The most pressing challenges that were raised in this consultation included strengthening the holistic view and improving implementation and oversight of governance initiatives, supply chain certification and due diligence, circular economy approaches, governance capacity building, supporting responsible ASM, risk management, collaboration and linkages for knowledge sharing, community participation in environmental and social governance, and finally, the energy transition. A large number of good practices were presented during the consultation, and a short list of them include the Swiss-sponsored ASM projects in Mongolia, the UN Guiding Principles on Human Rights. We heard that Turkey is developing a strategy to understand their resource potential and develop a knowledge-based approval process, including environmental and social data for ESIAs and strategic planning. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD's due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. We heard that Kyrgyzstan is creating an interagency group to coordinate mine governance and plans to develop new policies and legislation. The Code of Risk Mitigation for ASM engaging in formal trade, and project level and supply chain specific standards that are in development, including, for example, the Global Battery Alliance. The potential future actions raised in the consultations are summarized in the following themes. Number one, to develop any future work by building on, strengthening and harmonising existing initiatives. Participants described a forest of initiatives for miners, governments and communities to navigate. Several suggestions about how this were managed were raised, including improving independent oversight, linking to human rights, developing compulsory standards, creating or improving grievance handling and dispute resolution mechanisms, monitoring and evaluation of standards impact, and a systematic assessment of the standards and initiatives against the UNGPs, SDGs, and so on. The second theme was to improve multi-stakeholder knowledge sharing to improve the holistic effectiveness of governance. National and subnational governance capacity was raised in both sub-regional consultations. A wide variety of areas for improvement were noted, including alignment with the SDGs, human rights and Indigenous peoples' rights, tailings management, abandoned mines, and environmental, social and geological knowledge bases. Countries are at different stages in terms of their policy development, so knowledge sharing is important. Collaboration will be required to deal with many of the legacy issues related to orphaned and abandoned mines, management of existing operations and future projects. The third theme was to improve tailings waste management technology and planning, including disaster risk reduction and resilience. Governments and industry need to better comply with the mitigation hierarchy in all phases, starting with environment and social assessment before mining operations, throughout operations, and also at the end of life phase of the tailings facility. Disaster risk management and resilience needs to be a focus going forward. Fourth, to continue dialogue on improving reporting and transparency. The dialogue processes underpinning reporting and transparency initiatives should continue to be supported. Options for incorporating or expanding new areas of governance beyond finance should be explored with the aim of improving holistic governance of the sector. Fifth, research about development, mineral or construction material substitutes. Several participants noted the need for further research and policy actions on circular economy initiatives. While there have been discussions on these issues for many years, we need to build on previous work calling for better systemic engagement along the minerals and consumption chains, incorporating investors, financiers, traders, plus the government and community stakeholders. Sixth, participants suggested that we need to improve due diligence processes, including questioning whether there could be a process similar to the RUGI framework for environmental issues. Transparency in the supply chain is critical. Strong disclosure requirements put pressure on purchasing companies to better map their supply chains and to identify and mitigate risks, including by conveying expectations through the supply chain. The OECD due diligence in supply chain is an increasingly common point of reference for market and investor level expectations, and there was support for considering its utility beyond conflict settings. Further work is needed to encourage responsible engagement with ASM rather than ignoring the industry. Formalisation of ASM is seen as beneficial and an important point of access in terms of addressing environmental impacts of mining. The final theme was to further cross-industry partnerships, for example, the above-mentioned Global Battery Alliance. Opportunities to connect with industries at all stages of the supply chain are an opportunity to raise awareness of minerals governance issues and provide further momentum supporting responsible resource use and management. That concludes the European Caucasus summary. Back to you, Rie.
Thank you very much, Julia, on the summary from the Europe and Central Asia region. I now turn to my colleague Francesco from UNEP Panama office for the feedback from the Latin America and Caribbean region. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. And today I'm reporting back to you what we heard from the sub-regional and regional consultations held over the period July-August 2020. These inputs include a list of challenges, good practices, and potential future actions. So, starting with the main challenges raised by participants, there was a quite important discussion around the rising number of conflicts between local communities and operators due to the environmental and health impacts of mining activities. We also had a number of comments regarding the need to develop a clear set of plans for extractive economies in the energy transition, which is especially important for the Latin America region, and a general lack or a weak harmonization in governance frameworks in the region. Also, we heard from participants about the need to develop mechanisms to promote the inclusion of civil society and impacted communities in the discussions and the technical decisions as well regarding the mining sector, and in general the environmental and social legacies of mining were really an important point that was raised during the consultations. Major accidents at tailing facilities are still too frequent in Latin America and Caribbean, and there is a clear need to improve designing and safety for tailing facilities. Artisanal small mining formalization and development is again a very important and major issue for Latin America in particular, and also illegal mining and its relationship with organized crime is again another important social, economic, and environmental issue for Latin America. And notably because of the interest of organized crime to invest in illegal mining, especially from narco-traffic. So in general, there was an agreement by participants that there is a quite weak or a lack of strategic planning for short, medium, and long-term production in the sector. Going now to the good practices that we were able to gather and to compile from the consultations. The discussion on good practices also revealed that some of the challenges raised in consultation are being addressed in some jurisdictions. In Mexico, for example, there are examples of strong intergovernmental cooperation and coordination between different government units. Gender parity initiative is another interesting initiative that we heard supported by the Inter-American Development Bank, or IDB. Some other jurisdictions in the region have domesticated and adopted the ILO Convention 169 concerning indigenous and tribal peoples. Mexico, again, is in the process of rolling out its National Action Plan as part of the implementation of the Minamata Convention on Mercury. And the region has also seen the successful operationalization of the Basel Convention on the transboundary movement of hazardous wastes. In Argentina, a national mining plan is in place that has components related to financing of artisanal miners and supporting formalization of the artisanal mining sector. In the Andean region, the bilateral coordination mechanism are being carried out between Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and Ecuador to fight against illegal mining, as well as at the level of the Andean community. In Ecuador, finally, through the project National Action Plan for Mercury in Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining, in compliance with Article 7 of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, in Ecuador, it has been established a strategy to reduce releases and risk of exposure to mercury and elimination of worst practices. Coming now to the future action or potential future action that raised from the discussion. First of all, it was very much clear that there is a clear need from the region around the need to increase the regional capacity for research and funding on tailing storage. Another key point that has been discussed is related to the development of mine closure legislation, legal and technical assistance from other jurisdictions or in international organization on the development of legislation for mine closure is really key. And participants suggested that this may be an area for future action, alluding to the need to establish legal mechanisms for development of rehabilitation bonds, mine closure plans, including economic, environmental, and social concerns, public participation processes, and alternative land use options. A third big area of discussion is related to capacity building, which is obviously another area where the region would like to increase investments and cooperation, especially around the theme of meaningful participation and inclusion in decision-making. And in this specific area of capacity building or capacity development, the main focus has been on strengthening capacities to carry out a good and meaningful participation of all stakeholders, including affected communities, throughout the planning and development of mining project, ensuring that communities are provided with appropriate information, advice, and ongoing support. And the example of the domestication of ILO 169 and other standards are a very good example in the region along these lines. Increase transboundary cooperation on challenging issues such illegal mining is again a key point, has been a key point for the discussion, recognizing also that illegal mining has a growing association with other crimes, such as narcotraffic, human trafficking, child labor, smuggling, and also money laundering. So, according to the participants, it's really critical, it's key to work on this area and to strategy to increase this transboundary cooperation. Again, artisanal small mining has been is considered as a important area for potential future cooperation and work and action in the region. And a future step could be to promote spaces for the exchange of experiences among the ASM community. And this would be particularly beneficial in relation to applying new technologies without the use of mercury, for instance. And Last, but I would say probably the most important area, which is very much cross-cutting and transversal to all the areas that I just mentioned to you, is the environmental protection per se. Because all participants identified environmental protection as a critical area for future work, suggesting activities, specific activities, including capacity building and technical assistance for countries to develop regulation of mining activities, such, for instance, land permits, land use permits, water permits, etc. Capacity development about also the inspection, enforcement, and sanctions regimes available around this environmental protection big area. And finally, encourage transparency, participatory monitoring and accountability within the industry. Okay, that was my very short summary on main inputs we received from the sub-regional and regional consultation, and we'll give back the floor to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for the feedback on the Latin America and Caribbean consultations. I'm very happy to hand back over to Julia for the summary from North America.
Thank you very much, Ria, and I'll present the summary from North America. The North America consultation was held on the 16th of September with 43 participants connected to the discussion. The participants presented the following most pressing mineral resource governance challenges. First, the challenge of inclusion of local community, gender, Indigenous peoples, and other communities that are often excluded. Two was scaling up assistance and building on existing frameworks. Three was the climate change driven energy transition. Four was responsible mineral supply chains. Five, the move from voluntary to compulsory standards. And six was tailings storage and environmental legacies. In relation to good practices, the following 7 points were tabled. Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy, the IGF Mining Policy Framework, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the OECD Due Diligence Frameworks, the RUGI Framework or UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, the National Orphaned or Abandoned Mines Initiative, the IRMA standards, and the Safety First Guidelines for Responsible Mine Tailings Management. In terms of future actions, participants suggested the following. Number one, governance capacity development and modernization. Opportunities for holistic, integrated, and ongoing capacity building are needed on the wide spectrum of minerals governance issues. Participants advocated a strategic discussion on the elevation of social and environmental safeguards within existing frameworks. This will be enhanced by developing a targeted and coordinated strategy for improving the coherence of existing frameworks to support sustainable development and the just transition or green recovery. We should also analyse the potential to move from voluntary to regulated standards on the spectrum of minerals governance issues. Opportunities for remedy and redress should also be included. Two, on the issue of inclusion of local community, gender and Indigenous peoples, the focus should remain on empowering grassroots and community organisations to participate fully in decisions impacting their futures. Mineral resource governance policies should be updated to include human rights due diligence, gender equality, and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. 3, participants felt a need for cross-sector dialogue. Meaningful dialogue about the ongoing role of mining in a carbon-constrained world will be needed across mineral producing and mineral using sectors, as well as the finance sector and Indigenous and impacted communities. Finally, on responsible mineral supply chains, awareness raising should encourage supply chain due diligence to be the norm for all private actors. That's the North American summary. Thank you very much. I'll hand the floor back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Julia. Finally, over to Tarek from UNEP Bahrain office for his presentation from the West Asia region.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tarek Al-Khouri and I will be presenting the outcome of this resolution implementation in West Asia region. The consultation for West Asia kicked off with a general briefing on the 23rd of July 2020, and this was followed by a regional consultation on the 26th of August 2020. Almost 40 participants from the region connected to these discussions. Starting with sharing some challenges as shared by our country. Firstly, there is a need of awareness methodology for business leaders about the importance of implementing the social license to operate or the sustainable development license to operate, and how to create sustainable partnership between businesses, leaders, and policymakers. Secondly, there is a challenge by some Arab governments to promote public participation in the decision related to mineral resources. Third, access to information and data is an issue for researchers at the general public. They have difficulties in accessing information on mineral resources from the official information portal, whether it's the position of government or companies. Fourth, regarding mineral investment, unfortunately, many issues of good governance of the mineral sector in West Asia countries are neglected and needs more information sharing. Finally, there is currently no strategy for managing mineral materials in the Arab region or Arab countries, including the Gulf state. And there is also a need to develop guidelines for environmental impact assessment in some countries. In terms of good practices, the region has a lots of good practices, especially in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries or the Gulf countries. So I would be glad to present some of those good examples. Starting with Kuwait, the Environment Public Authorities Act as a monitoring agency for the project and activities of the state. Environmental and social impact assessment of those activities and projects must be done before the project commences. On sand extraction, the Kuwait Institute for Science Research is rehabilitating the area that was subject to the destruction of the surface soil during the years of exploitation. And a number of projects for the rehabilitation and cultivation of plant and fungal species are currently being implemented. In Saudi Arabia, the mining sector has turned into a major economic tributary, and it is considered the third tributary within the Kingdom's 2030 vision. Work is carried out in accordance with the laws required by the United Nations and other organizations. And in the second stage, the application of programs, regulation, and legislation will be applied to investors in mining. Further, Saudi Arabia has many minerals and the country is working to exploit this wealth, which is estimated at 5 trillion Saudi riyals. Saudi Arabia is also working with the World Bank in terms of sustainability, in line with the best practices in the world, and this includes closure and rehabilitation of mining sector. Also of importance, Saudi Arabia's interest in using waste as an alternative to sand. In Oman, the mining sector has been developed and environmental considerations were introduced into the development of these sectors. The development plan began with the establishment of the Mining Authority, and the preparation of the mining strategy began in 2017-2018. The goal of this strategy are sustainability, improving the standard of living, preserving the environment, and the participation of the local community. In UAE, in United Arab Emirates, the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC, have committed to coordinate mineral wells, and there are some joint initiatives and projects, including the development of mining strategy from the GCC country with support from Emirates, which has been approved. In terms of further action emerged from the regional consultation, so participants from the region shared a great range of ideas for further action. They mainly centered around the following two: recycling and reuse, further research into the recycling and reuse of tailing and other mine waste, harmonization of mining laws, policies, and government initiatives, coordinate mining initiatives and law between the relevant ministers, such as the ministries of mining, the ministries of environment and energy, and other ministries. Technical assistance and capacity building are needed in the region. Many opportunities for technical assistance and capacity building were nominated by participants, particularly in relation to compliance and enforcement of new and existing regulation. Participants also called for more information regarding legislation, method, and law to deal with the use of treated waste and raw material, the impact of sand use from some areas, especially beaches and biodiversity, feasibility of removing chemical from tailing dams, and finally, the best solution studies and promising research in the field of use of the desert sand. With that, I conclude my remark, Madam Chair, and back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarek. Distinguished participants, you have now heard the feedback from all of the regions on the most pressing mineral resource governance challenges, the good practices being applied to address those challenges, and several excellent suggestions for future actions. We are now turning the floor over to you for your reactions and feedback on this summary. In particular, we would like your views on the possible actions that could be taken to further this agenda within UNEP, as well as in collaboration with its partners within and outside of the UN system, and which should be discussed at UNEA 5. Please focus on this key point in your intervention. To make an oral intervention, please request access to the microphone by clicking the blue Request to Speak button at the bottom right of your screen. Please note that only a few people can be given the microphone at the same time, but we will try to grant access to as many speakers as possible. Please remember to unmute your microphone when access has been granted and to switch on your camera to enable adequate interpretation. Allow me to open the floor to the distinguished representatives. At this moment, may I have a floor to Bobby Yavi? I'm just checking messaging if anybody has requested floors. May I give first floor to Martin from Switzerland, please?
Yes. Hello, Rie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
very
well.
good. Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for this discussion at the Global Forum. I'm very impressed of the result. At the beginning, I thought of the process. I thought, oh, so many regional meetings, what will be the result at the end? But all the region really put together what they want to say, the next steps, the best practice. I am very impressed. We spoke about the tailings issues, about mining guidelines, minimal standards, research, technology, small-scale mining, illegal mining, access to information, etc., public participation. And I'm just thinking what could be the next steps, because it was the first time at UNEA 4 that we had this success with this resolution, that all community thought it is an important issue. Now we have this incredible process with all this regional consultation. We have result, and I think UNEP should deliver after UNEA 5 in all these issues put on the floor now. And I'm just thinking a little bit loud, what do we need? What does UNEP need at UNEA 4 to continue the work, to continue the discussion on all these topics? And I'm thinking perhaps it will be useful to establish an intergovernmental expert group with all countries where we can really say, oh, what do we need to discuss first? Is it tailings management? Do we need a special group on guidelines? Do we need more groups dealing with specific issues like small-scale mining, etc.? And I think it will be very useful to have a new mandate on UNEA 5, a new resolution, taking stock of all this work be done now and to continue the discussion in broader international context at UNEP. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we would take a bit more comments first. I would like to floor to Sheikh Fofana, who is from Senegal. May I give you a floor? Maybe Mr. Richard Afenu.
Allô?
Yes, thank you.
Allô? Allô?
We can hear you.
Je peux parler?
Oui.
Hello. Hello. Hello, can I speak?
Because for some reason I cannot see.
Allô?
Yes, could you please state your name and affiliation and then start the intervention, please?
Can I speak? Allô? Allô?
Yes.
Est-ce que je peux parler?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Ok, merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. My name is Sheikh Fofana. I am the Deputy Director for the Ministry of the Environment for Sustainable Development in Senegal, and I'm delighted to be included in this global consultation on Resolution 419 of UNEA relating to governance of mineral resources. I'm also very pleased to have had the various summaries made as far as Africa is concerned, in which I took part along with other members of the Ministry of the Environment and of the Mining and Geology Ministry. I'm entirely in agreement with the presentation which was made by Robert of the different points which were raised come out of the regional consultations. However, I would like to strengthen once again one point by highlighting the environmental dimension in the definitions of the policies for mining through, as was said in consultations, the environmental assessments, and during those to highlight the follow-up of the environmental management plans from a social point of view as well, because this is extremely important. I'd also like to highlight the need for setting up policies which are socially responsible by the mining companies. And these should respond to the requirements of the mining communities around the mines. I don't wish to take the floor for too long, but we should also promote local content, as we've done in Senegal, to make sure that the oil communities and other stakeholders can be directly involved in the definition of the implementation, the follow-up of the mining policies. So, Madam Chair, these are just a few points I wanted to add and to stress to complement the summary provided by Robert for the Africa region. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. There are a couple of people who wishes to take floor, in addition to quite a few comments. So for next speaker, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Richard Afenu. Richard, over to you. I cannot see Richard online. Would it be possible to give floor to Shanti Persaud from Government of Jamaica?
Good morning, all. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. A wonderful engagement this morning. I think in particular for Jamaica, we have serious challenges with the legacy issues as well as dealing with the community engagement. So absolutely, as we try to navigate our way forward in this situation, the whole pandemic scenario, COVID-19, has created additional challenges in terms of regulations. So many things have been put on hold. Many people are now in economic hardship. And the way to move forward, as has been suggested in this forum, where the mining sector should really be able to see a better path to assist the return to normal development as well as additional development, is something that we have not really been able to see our way forward. And hopefully, as time goes on, we will be able to have a lot of regional and international cooperation so that where things are working in a very positive way, we can learn from those engagements. I did very much like the comment about an intergovernmental expert panel, because absolutely, where we can not have to reinvent the wheel for our own local context, that usually is very much appreciated. Legacy issues are going to be a big challenge for us. We do have quite a bit of pieces of legislation, sorry, that don't really address long-standing problems. So this is something that we will definitely need some additional resources on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Richard ready to talk? If not, I would like to give floor to Mr. Alberto Capra from the government of Argentina.
Buenos días, ¿me escuchan bien?
The interpreter cannot hear the speaker very loudly. Could the speaker speak up, please? Yes, that's better. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead. We can hear you. Please go ahead, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. We can hear you very well. Please go ahead. My name is Alberto Santos Capra from the Secretariat for Mining of the Republic of Argentina. And we work under the Directorate for Environmental Policy and thank you, Francesco, so much for the summary that you provided on the development of the compendium of information made for the Latin America and Caribbean region. I would like to highlight a number of aspects which were included earlier. Argentina is greatly interested in short, medium, and long-term strategic planning for mining and is working on a strategic plan this planning is due to be developed over the next couple of years, between 2020 and 2023, and it is due to be a strategic plan for 2020 to 2025. One of the principal aspects is that we understand that there should be clarifications and strategies, and that we should take into account climate change and the ways in which mining and hydrological resources are being utilized. The interpreter apologizes, however, the sound quality is not sufficient to continue providing interpretation. Interpretation will resume as soon as better audiovisual quality is available. Thank you.
Como sugirió una colega anterior, en un ámbito intergubernamental, tal vez un panel o una comisión o otro ente que a la Asamblea de Naciones Unidas decida. También deseábamos hacer hincapié desde Argentina la importancia que para nosotros tiene el tema género y específicamente en la minería. La minería es una actividad que, a diferencia de otras, la cuestión de género es altamente relevante. Los porcentajes, en el caso de Argentina, de trabajo de mujeres en el sector minero, es entre el 6 y el 8%. Y la idea fundamental del país es disminuir las brechas. No solamente en el sector minero, sino en todos los otros sectores. Por eso nosotros, que estamos en el marco de un Ministerio de Desarrollo Productivo, se ha creado un consejo asesor en el cual estamos participando, y Argentina ha sido uno de los primeros países en el cual se ha sujetado a una iniciativa
Thank you, Alberto. And sorry that some of the part of his intervention were not translated due to the quality of the sound. Now I would like to give floor to Richard Harkinson from London Mining Network. Richard, may I give you floor? While we are waiting for him, maybe he has some technical problem. So let me give the floor to Nasama Musonda Kians, please. Richard, are you back on the floor? Would you like to try to speak?
Hello, Chair. Right, I think I'm on now, right?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think that I would comment mainly on the African issue as presented. Clearly, there are two issues that I want to look at in terms of the regional consultations as it relates to good practices and all that. I think that clearly there are two things. The African Mining Vision, for example, which was adopted in 2009 and has got very excellent and lofty clusters, which I believe if African countries carry through some of these programs, it will lead to the development of the continent. It will lead to the development of the continent. So in this regard, it's important that we have a system in place where we can monitor the compliance level of African countries as far as the implementation of the African Mining Vision is concerned. 2009 till 2020 is about 11 long years, and I can assure that most African countries have not come any close to the implementation of the African mining vision, much less carrying out their country mining visions as anticipated in the African mining vision. So we need to have a system in place where we need to ensure the level of compliance and to ensure that we are on track. Now, if you come to the Minamata Convention, which came into effect in August 2017, clearly this had to be, by now, we ought to have been compliant with the Minamata Convention. But is there any system in place to ensure that countries are making the effort so as to be compliant? We all know that these were all voluntary. We all signed onto this, voluntarily, just as we did for the EITI. But the EITI has a system in place where they carry out validation, they carry out an assessment as to whether countries are compliant with the EITI principles, etc., etc. Even though there are no sanctions, there is a perception that if you're not compliant, then you are not transparent enough as far as the extractive industries is concerned. So I would very much like us to look at this two things very critically and see how we can have systems in place to ensure that we carry through some of these lofty programs. Now there was an issue about royalties to communities, which I saw in the slide. Royalties generally are payable to the owner of the minerals, in this case governments of the respective countries. Now, as government owns these minerals, royalties are due them. But the question is, to what extent that we can recycle some of these monies back to the communities, so that the communities that suffer the brunt of these mining activities have seem to benefit from these mining activities. In some jurisdictions, we have a community development scheme whereby a portion of the mineral royalties are circled back to the communities. I think it's a framework that we need to look at that. Looking into the future, we need to also be looking at research and development as far as the extractive industries are concerned. If you don't do that, we will actually be stagnating and not making the required improvement in the development of our mineral resources. And much as we do this, illegal mining activity, or in terms of the small scale mining, has become so topical that it appears that most countries are losing the battle against illegal mining, illegal small scale mining. And so if you do not take these things into proper account and put them into the right perspective, the gains made by small scale mining may be overwritten by the environmental and the social impact of these illegal mining activities. So, but for want of time, these are some of the focus points that I really want to raise. I don't need to belabor the point that African countries have the immense natural resources and all that. But to what extent that are we exploiting this? To what extent that are we adding value addition? All these things are adequately captured in the African mining vision, which you have to domesticate into our respective country mining visions. To what extent are we doing that? Who is ensuring that we get this done? I think these are some of my primary comments. And as we go on, we will see what I can, what I'll have to offer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now I would like to give floor to Nusama Musonda Kians, who is the CEO of Care for Nature. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this panel, because I was also a conference in Livingstone where the Mosotunya Declaration was adopted, and since then we have been doing quite a number of works in the communities to see how we can get the local
Excuse me.
involved in mining
Excuse me.
Zambia, as you may be aware.
Could you hear me? Madam
Hello?
Kiant? Yes. Unfortunately, your
Okay,
sound
Zambia,
is
as you may
breaking
be
and we
aware,
cannot hear
Africa
you.
that has pollution legacies. For a long time, our country has suffered from the issue of pollution, and we've got cases like in Kabwe, where we have, which is quite expensive. It's going to be very expensive.
Oh, I'm afraid we cannot hear Ms. Kiant, and we would ask her to send us a written submission. I think now we have 3 speakers. May I give floor to first Luca Marmo?
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you are hearing me well. I have 2 comments. The first one relates to what Martin Ron, our Swiss colleague, said before, in terms of what UNEA 5 could do in terms of mineral resource governance. And I think would be useful building on the work done by the International Resource Panel that was at the basis of the first resolution on mineral resource governance adopted at UNEA 4 last year. Building on all the consultations that UNEP has carried out at the regional level and further contribution that can come in coming weeks, it would be very useful if UNEA 5 could be informed about governance gaps and major issues identified in this process, so that it would have a basis for taking further decisions on whether it is necessary, suitable to go ahead with further work at the global level in terms of the governance of mineral resources. This also taking into account that there are existing initiatives like the Intergovernmental Forum on Mineral Metals and Sustainable Development, and to see are these existing initiatives not enough, and so what would then be need to be done in order to fill gaps. So that's my first comment. Sorry, I should have introduced myself first. My name is Luca Marmo. I work at the European Commission, the Director General for Environment. The second comment concerns the work that in the EU we are doing, in the European Union we are doing on circularity, on promoting the transition to a circular economy. This was the object of a resolution at UNEA 4 on sustainable consumption and production, which also discussed the circular economy approach. And I say this because in the circular economy approach, there is first an issue about designing waste out from products and discussing sustainability aspects of production and consumption. So the issue of keeping materials in the economic cycle as long as possible is very much at the heart of the circular economy concept. So work on mineral resource governance and circularity, resource efficiency, and sustainable consumption and production should go hand in hand because they are mutually supportive. We all want to stay within planetary boundaries. We all want not to exceed the current capacity of the environment. And of course, the production of mineral, or the extraction and the processing of minerals has impacts on the environment. So they are necessary materials for our economic and social development, but we need to minimize impacts, and an approach towards more sustainability, in particular through a circular economy model, is the one that we should pursue in parallel to identifying existing gaps at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca. Now we have 2 more speakers, and then we will move to the closing session, where some of the questions in the chat box could be addressed. The interpreters have kindly accepted to extend this session a little bit longer, but since the time is rather limited, may I ask Richard Harkinson and Roberto Parra to limit your intervention up to 3 minutes. Let me give floor to Richard. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. I'm from an NGO. We're based in London. We work with communities in developing countries. We work with countries in European member states as well. I have to flag out the idea that when we talk about sustainability, the need was identified to decouple growth and consumption. We must have and that's not just a question of efficiency, as Luca Marmo eloquently argued. It's also a question of using less, mining less. That's important. We have to recognize that mining waste has increased at a greater rate because of the declining grades of ore. That tailings have increased in size, in volume, so that we have a situation where you had in Brazil, the UN Special Rapporteur recent report has said, this is the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights and the management of toxic waste. Brazil is in a state of deep regression from human rights principles, laws, and standards in a violation of international law. I won't go on further. It's a very edifying report he writes. The situation, when we talk about tailings, was occasioned by the disaster of killing over 300 people in Minas Gerais in Brazil. After that, there's been involvement of the United Nations within something with the large mining companies, trade association, the ANGS review and standard. We criticized the lack with other civil society organizations in around about 140 people have produced an initiative called the Safe, an effective, rigorous, robust, independent international organization to deal with the question of what would be a resource from what's been said in the talks so far from around the world. So that would be a real factor. So we want to emphasize, like the UN's Institute, the International Civil Aviation Mechanism, and that can
Sorry,
reach out
Richard.
and therefore try to prevent waste disasters.
Yes.
Must be regulated. And
Thank you very
congratulate
much,
on the
Richard. I'm
UN. Our
sorry.
UN economic is the most effective way of guaranteeing
I'm sorry.
environmental information passes.
It's just because your sound was also broken and it was not possible for translation. But I think I have heard your main points. And if you would like to submit additional comments, it would be most welcomed. Now I would like to give the floor to our last speaker, Mr. Robert Parra. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. I'm very glad to receive the invitation to participate here. I want to be very short on my comments. I'm professor at the University of Concepcion, full professor at the Department of Metallurgy. So we saw here very interesting challenges from different realities. So I have a proposal for the United Nations Bureau that maybe you can lead some documents, some reports that take into account the best practice in order to have a general reference from this, for those challenges that are focused on different realities all over the world. The geography defined very clear that we are in a different stage for how to diminish the gap to arrive to the best practice. But to have that reference, I propose that you lead some reports to have those best practice. And in this sense, there are three main topics: the legal best practice, the technology, and in the technologies, the environmental, the impact. I mean, tailings, gas emissions, of course, the energy consumption, the energy intensity of the technologies. What are the best practice on that? And also the third level, the third topic is the relation with communities, how to have the license to operate. So three topics in also three levels of the size of the industry. We have heard here about the mining activities at the very low, little art that we say in français, les activités minières artisanales. Sorry for my English. Then we have medium-sized companies, and then we have the big companies that operates all over the world. So three levels of size and three topics. And those reports talking about the best practice that you can identify, because what is the best for a little company maybe is not the best for the little miners that are working in South America, for example. And all those concepts must be taken into account, the big frame, high-level view of the climate change and the circular economy, how we introduce the circular economy on those practices. Thank you very much. No, it's okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your timely intervention, Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the closing of this consultation. But before we end the session, I would like to give the floor to Professor Daniel Franks to share with us the key takeaways from today's discussion. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Rie. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge this is the last moment we will be together on these virtual consultation process that we have had for the last few months. And I want to thank everyone for being so active and participating in such a meaningful way. We had so many people from so many different countries, coming from different backgrounds with different experience, sharing their perspectives, their views, their insights, their ideas. It's been a really worthwhile and meaningful process. I'd like to thank all of the UNEP regional officers that have really led this process in this charge, and also the UNEP team, and also from my side, from the University of Queensland as well, Julia, for supporting this whole effort. The process doesn't stop here, though, in the sense that what we've done so far is we've listened. We will now collate, and we will put down into writing what we've heard, and we'll report that to member states for them to consider and to think about what next steps might come from UNEA 5. So we would like your participation, whether you're coming from a member state government or from other stakeholder groups, in the coming process as we go forward as well. Today, we've heard some fantastic summaries from our colleagues, and we've also heard some additional input on top of that. We heard from Martine from Switzerland, from the government of Switzerland, with an idea around an intergovernmental expert group. We heard from Luca Marmo from the European Union on the need to summarize all this information and best practices to present it to member states. And I can assure you, Luca, that is a goal and priority and action item that is on our agenda. And then looking to UNEA 5 about where are the gaps and what can we build on and what can we move forward. You mentioned the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining and Metals, and that is a forum that has been a platform for knowledge sharing for many years, since the Johannesburg Earth Summit 20 years ago. And we've seen lots of mining ministries from member states join that platform. I think what we're hearing is that there's an environment agenda and perhaps a potential for environment ministries to participate in the IGF, and perhaps an expansion of the IGF into regional platforms that could be supported through a UNEA process. We heard from Richard from the London Mining Network talking about the importance of an independent tailings agency. This is definitely something that UNEP and the Principles on Responsible Investment have been calling for, to implement the global industry standard on tailings management. And perhaps that's something that the UNEA process might like to pick up and comment on as we go forward as well. Richard Afanu from Ghana was talking about the important history and experience and learnings from the Africa Mining Vision, which is a visionary document. It has a great deal that many other regions in the world can learn from. And our African colleagues, as we go forward, would provide a lot of value to other regions of the world in sharing that experience. But there's a need to see how that progress has been implemented at the country level, and also putting in place validation mechanisms, as Richard suggested. And I think that's relevant for all the different governance initiatives that are out there. We heard Alberto Capra from Argentina talking about the important role of strategic planning, and others have also talked about in the chat box environmental and social licensing. These are kind of things that are usually member state level responsibility, government responsibility, who have sovereignty over natural resources and mineral resources. And I guess the role of a UNEA process and the role of international cooperation is sharing those experiences and building the capacity amongst member states to learn from each other. There was quite a few comments about that this evening, or today for others in better time zones. We also heard from Shanti from Jamaica talking about the critical role of community engagement. There was others on the messaging function talking about public participation and social regulation. This is a key part of the governance mix that we've been hearing about from lots of different regions. I think I'm going to wrap it up there and just say that we have captured these additional insights. We will now look to report on them, as I mentioned earlier, in the various reporting for UNEA. You can expect a public report in December. And we really invite you to be part of the UNEA process if you're a member state government, but also to follow the process and continue to participate from all the different stakeholder groups. Once again, thank you for a really rich process. It's been something that we've been privileged to be involved in, and have learnt a lot, and will continue to support the United Nations Environment Programme. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for helping us round off this session so succinctly. Colleagues, distinguished representatives, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to acknowledge a few key persons involved in the implementation of this resolution. Firstly, as mentioned at the start, the proponents of this resolution during UNEA 4, the governments of Switzerland and Mexico, represented by Ms. Laura Parchkov and Ms. Gabriela Miran, respectively. Within UNEP, I'm pleased to acknowledge the regional directors from all 6 of UNEP regional offices, as well as directors of sub-regional offices. Ligia Norona, Director of UNEP's Economy Division, who has been supported by Angela Kariuki and Elisa Tonda throughout the whole process. Professor Daniel Franks and Julia Keenan from the University of Queensland, all the regional focal points involved in this implementation process, Robert, Patrick, Cecilia, Angele, Aidai, Francesco, Tarek, Hilary, and Fatou. Regional colleagues who have provided support in various capacities include Saranya, Catherine, Nora, Nafisa, Awatif, Suzanne, Katia, and Chelsea. We are also extremely grateful to colleagues from the UNECE, UNECA, UNECLAC, UNESCOA, GRIT Geneva, GRIT Arundel, and the International Resource Panel, as well as our partners at the European Commission and OECD. We also would like to thank the UNON Conference Service Section for providing the platform and interpretation services to these meetings. And finally, our biggest thanks and gratitude is reserved for all of you, the participants from all regions who have actively engaged in this consultation process from the start, collectively provided over 100 written submissions on the UNEA resolutions, and have assisted us with contacts and other helpful information that have contributed to making this process success. We hope to remain connected as we prepare for UNEA 5 and to contribute to the mineral resource governance agenda within the UN system. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a very good rest of the day. Goodbye.